Through random circumstances, I happen to be here at a Home Depot that is the largest Home Depot, as far as I'm aware. It has almost 19,000 square meters of internal floor space, and there's historical reasons for why it's the largest one. It was originally 2 stores that got knocked into one as part of an experiment, and I'm just wandering along here giving you a view of the store frontage. It's busy, there's construction going on, there's a lot of people buying stuff. This Home Depot's in a flood zone, so they have sort of watertight dam doors that come down for hurricanes and floods, because of course shortly after a hurricane or flood everyone runs to Home Depot, so you need to keep the Home Depots running. Okay, there you go, that's enough of that. Now I'm going to drive from this Home Depot in Union, Vauxhall, New Jersey, to Bedminster, I think. I think I'm going to drive to Bedminster, which is also in New Jersey, and is the location of a famous place recently. But I'm going to get on 78 West. We're going to jump on Express, and we should be having a clear shot all the way out with no traffic to Bedminster. Let's give some news on the radio.
Today on the Brian Lair Show, the Centennial Series, 100 Years of 100 Things, looks at...
So this entrance is 78 West Express only, and if I wanted to hit the little piece of local or hit 24, there was another entrance. This section here is 78 Express West.
Believe in my say. 61 and partly sunny today, a chance of sprinkles by afternoon, mostly sunny and 66. Cooler tomorrow, mostly sunny and 61 for a high.
This is Jason Mendes with NewsHour. Now, a new report into the global second-hand clothes market says the trade can play a role in driving sustainable growth both in Europe and in Africa. The study was commissioned by Humana People to People, a network of development charities around the world that derive a proportion of their income from that second-hand market. And it estimates that the sector is worth about $8 billion a year and supports a huge number of jobs. Nearly 1.3 million in 5 African countries it looked at in detail: Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Malawi, Mozambique and Zambia. However, there have long been complaints that the huge number of second-hand clothes imported into Africa undermines local textile manufacturing and often generates huge amounts of waste. Sarah Kent, Chief Sustainability Correspondent for the Business of Fashion, which covers the global fashion and beauty industries, has given us her reaction to the report.
This is an industry that's quite opaque. There's not a lot of data on how it operates or the value it creates. But certainly it is the case that it is a large economic contributor to certain countries, and that has been underappreciated. And it does create value, it does create jobs. And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge.
What do you think is behind it? Is there a threat to the second-hand clothes trade in Africa, do you think?
This report is coming out ahead of fresh negotiations on how the EU is planning to tackle textile waste that could restrict specifically exports of second-hand clothes to other countries, and that could have a serious impact on the second-hand clothing trade, which is already under a lot of pressure because collecting and sorting textiles is expensive. The quality of clothes coming through the second-hand clothing stream is reducing as more fast fashion comes on the market, and so there's a lot of pressures already in the sector.
Why does the European Union want to regulate it further? I mean, is it because there hasn't been much of a system for funneling those vast quantities of clothes towards second-hand markets that might be able to use them?
The impetus for the regulation is less around how the trade has operated and more around how the problem of textile waste is growing. Even within the EU, even though we do have very large volumes of textile waste that are collected and exported every year, it's actually a fraction of the waste that is generated within the region. And so we have a lot of waste that is going to landfills in Europe without really a good solution for that. So really the EU saw this as a growing waste problem and wants to find ways to tackle that, and in doing so it's looking at the second-hand trade.
In terms of the second-hand clothing market in Africa, I mean, how green is it, would you say?
In the first place, having a second-hand market for clothes is much better than just disposing of them. So in that sense, it is part of a circular economy. The problem is that it is simply deferring what happens to these old clothes and pushing it onto another country. So in the same way that the EU doesn't have a final solution for textile waste, African countries don't either. And so where clothes do end up as waste, where they cannot be sold, you end up with a huge problem of waste pollution.
And what about the argument that the second-hand clothing market undercuts a domestic clothing market in African countries?
It's definitely an issue that has made this hugely controversial in African countries and periodically spurred moves by policymakers to ban the import of second-hand goods, and some countries have done so. I think it is more complicated, though, than it simply being that the import of second-hand clothes has prevented African countries from developing their own domestic textile sectors. It's certainly put competitive pressures on those sectors, but there are other factors that have contributed, not least opening up to global trade and having just broader imports coming in and competing with the domestic sector. I do think also what's interesting now in the context of conversations around moves to improve the global circular economy is that there's new opportunities emerging to develop fresh industries around recycling textiles in these countries as well.
That was Sarah Kent, who's Chief Sustainability Correspondent for the Business of Fashion. Now, before we go, let's return to our top story, the imminent arrival of Hurricane Milton on Florida's west coast. It has just been downgraded from a Category 5 to a 4. Nevertheless, people in the state are still expecting there to be huge storm surges and, of course, damage. Let's talk to Tara Callaghan, a reporter at WGCU Public Media in Fort Myers, which is south of Tampa on that west coast. Tara, thanks for being with us today. What's going on in Fort Myers? What are people doing there?
So in Fort Myers right now, really in Lee County, we have mandatory, shelter in place. It's basically the last moments that people have access to the open county shelters. There are still openings and availability for people to get to an evacuation shelter, but time really is running out. Now is the time for people to make their plans to either decide to shelter in place or to seek a different route of evacuation in terms of open shelters throughout the counties.
Have some people got out, or are most people staying where they are?
It seems to be definitely a mix. This is the earliest that I personally have seen counties have evacuation orders put out. On Sunday, we saw evacuation orders for Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach, and we did see I-75, I think, as early as late Sunday into early Monday, Tuesday. I-75 northbound was completely jam-packed, so it does seem, considering Helene, considering Hurricane Ian 2 years ago, that people are taking this much more seriously. We've been hearing from people on the streets even that they're considering selling their homes after this. It's becoming something that's a little much for residents to handle year after year.
I can imagine. It was something we were talking about on the program earlier. I mean, what are the prospects for Fort Myers? I mean, we've been hearing that Tampa's obviously likely to be in the eye of the storm, but I guess, no one really knows, do they?
Really, no. It's usually that final moment. I recall working during Hurricane Ian, and we thought it was going to be much further north of us, and then we wound up getting a direct hit here in Fort Myers. It's just really, it's the direction that Milton is approaching from. So areas south of the landfall, they're expected to receive significant storm surge. We're seeing reports early as this morning from 8 to 10 feet, now up to 12 feet potentially in that storm surge, and that really is the most dangerous aspect of a storm.
Tara, thank you very much indeed. Tara Callaghan, reporter at WGCU Public Media, talking to us from Fort Myers in Florida. And just to let you know that there is a live page up and running, which of course will remain up and running throughout the day. Hurricane Milton is expected to make landfall, we think, in the early hours of tomorrow morning local local time. But that live page up and running on our website, bbc.com/news. That is it for this edition of the programme. From me and the rest of the News Hour team, thanks so much for being with us. I'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, bye-bye.
This is WNYC, FM, HD, and AM New York.
It's the Brian Mara Show on...
I see what looks like a white Ford Explorer in my rearview mirror. 50-50, it's a New Jersey State Trooper. It's a long way back, but it's gaining on me. Yep, it's definitely law enforcement, and it is in fact a New Jersey State Trooper. There we go.
Oh no, did a week as talk show hosts. But we begin with our lead Eric Adams reporter, Elizabeth Kim, as usual on Wednesdays after the mayor's weekly Tuesday news conferences came this week amid a continuing exodus of the mayor's very top appointees as the fallout from his indictment on corruption and defrauding the taxpayers charges. Hey Liz, happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday, Brian.
You want to set the scene for us a little before we play some clips of the mayor? You wrote to us, another day, another wave of departures, and you're calling this the post-Banks era. David Banks, Phil Banks, Terrence Banks, all brothers, one of them the school's chancellor, one the mayor's head of public safety, plus as of yesterday, Chancellor Banks' partner and fiancée, Sheena Wright, who was the first deputy mayor. They've all left. How dramatic is this wave of departures by people named Banks and people related to them?
Well, I think that the departure of the Banks family is especially significant, simply because of their decades-long relationship with the mayor. So the mayor and Phil Banks go back to their days in the NYPD together. And, you know, from his relationship with Phil, he also knows his younger brother, David Banks, who became the school's chancellor. David's longtime partner, now wife, is Sheena Wright, and she is the first deputy mayor. She was very important to the mayor early on when he was transitioning into office. She was the head of his transition team. So this is a family that is considered among the closest advisors to the mayor, and they have not been without controversy. It mainly stems from Phil Banks, because Phil Banks was, you know, famously the unindicted co-conspirator in a police bribery scandal about a decade ago. So he was always the center of controversy, and I think there was always a feeling that it was problematic for the mayor to have these three people who are members of a family working together so closely, because, you know, conflicts of interest can arise. You can see how, you know, having a first deputy mayor, and then she's married to the school's chancellor, and then you have the deputy mayor of public safety as his brother, it can, you know, it can cause problems. And I think, you know, throughout this, many people thought that this would pose a problem for the mayor, and
the driver of that car that just pulled over is getting out and has gone to the back of the car. I'm guessing he just needs something from the back. But it's kind of a crappy place to stop for a non-emergency event.
They were always...
Ooh, there's another state trooper waiting in a turnaround there on the other side. looking for naughty drivers, presumably. It might even be the one that passed me earlier. I wasn't paying attention to it because I was looking at the guy on the other side.
Lily and others departing the administration. And here's a question to the mayor yesterday from reporter Ethan Stark Miller of AM New York, and the mayor's response.
With this restructuring and with the recent resignations, I know you said it's not that many compared to 300,000, but I mean, 8 or so in a week is a lot, and these are all senior officials. Are you saying none of this is connected to your indictment and the federal investigations surrounding the administration? Because it seems like that's kind of the tone, that this is all just the usual shuffle that happens after a few years.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Not one person that has decided to do something else with their life said, Eric, it's because so much is going on. Not one person. Not one person.
Liz, why'd you choose that clip?
This was the mayor's second press conference at City Hall since he's been indicted, and I think there was still a lot of anticipation of what the tone would be following the first one, which was at times, somewhat tense. I think what was interesting about yesterday's press conference is how the posture that the mayor is assuming towards the investigation, towards how he's able to govern, and a lot of it defies belief. And that was one example of a question, and the way the mayor handled it, that it was just, I think all of us were sort of inside shaking our heads. It just stretches plausibility for the mayor to claim that none of these resignations have anything to do with the investigations, because we do know that many of these individuals, including those 3 banks' family members, had their phones seized by federal investigators.
Yeah, and there was an interesting, I watched the news conference and I noted something that the mayor said that raised my eyebrows, that the reporter in that clip referred to, but it went by kind of quick for our listeners. So the mayor had, in response to a previous question, said, well, there aren't that many people leaving. Yeah, you're talking about 8 people. There's a workforce of 300,000. He's talking about every civil service worker in all of New York City government, as if that's who it would affect.
The roadwork nonsense up ahead is the beginnings of a diversion where they're going to split off a couple of lanes of traffic and send it down a temporary bridge so they can work on the main bridge that's part of the carriageway here. On the left you can see the structure of one of the temporary bridges. There, that kind of cantilever trellisy thing. And so obviously there's a bridge here they want to maintain, and then there's another one further down. And so the idea is that there'll be a little diversion off to the side there. Today is Wednesday. I believe they're going to implement that diversion this Friday, and hopefully it will go smoothly and people won't get all confused. There's reason to believe they may get confused because, as you can see ahead, we have to sort ourselves out in the various lanes for which direction we want to go. Often there's a little jockeying coming over the hill there, where people who are in the far left lane realise they need to be in the far right lane.
Human beings. Now, what happened a week later was that, we were told, David Banks had told us that his plan was to leave at the end of the year. Last week, City Hall announces that they're going to move up his resignation date to the middle of this month. Now, the explanation that the mayor and his office gave was that they wanted a faster transition for the new chancellor, Melissa Aviles Ramos. But, the report...
I'm stuck behind 2 school buses and a Buick. Just my luck. This section here is where we always lose the radio reception from New York City, because we just came over a big hill, and so we're now partially occluded and get poor reception. that school bus at the back there was signalling left a second ago, and I have no idea whether they're going to try and jump out in front of me at the last minute or whether they really do wish to come off on this exit only lane. Yep. Signalling left again. And now ground almost to a halt, stuck on 287, because those drivers do not know which lane they need to be in. They need to be fired. It's incredibly dangerous to be just standing traffic on a road with 70-mile-an-hour traffic coming up behind you. Oh, they actually want to go north 202. Pity they didn't plan ahead earlier and figure out which lane they needed to be in. Ranty, ranty, ranty. To be fair, school bus drivers are not used to driving on freeways. This exit is a classic Jersey freeway exit, with all the garbage stacked up at the side where people toss it after they've been on the freeway at high speed and before they get into a neighbourhood. There's tons of it here. It's always like this. Okay. Rear school bus is signalling left, so I'm assuming they want to get in the left lane, or maybe not. Maybe again. Again. I'm giving them plenty of space. And in fact, I'm holding off traffic behind me so that they can implement their manoeuvre, but they're idiots. I've now got a pile of cars behind me because I'm giving the school buses space. Right, they're no longer signalling left. The school buses are from Weehawken, which is quite a long way from here. I have no idea what they would be doing here. They're currently empty, so it's not like there's a school trip of kids from Weehawken coming to Bedminster. Who knows what's going on? Okay, we're coming up to the centre of Bedminster up here. There's a lot of corporate buildings and some little residential neighbourhoods and a bunch of spread out stuff. The next light is Lamington Road. If we go left on Lamington Road, we come to a very famous golf course, the Trump National Golf Course. And if we go right, we come to Far Hills, where there's the famous steeplechase race. And I'm going to go right and then wander off to do what I need to do. I hope you had fun on this drive.